welcome to the Mindful Money Podcast. This podcast is a weekly exploration into a new philosophy of money through psychology, philosophy, and practical wisdom. In this episode of the Mindful Money Podcast,
we all want things to be happening instantly or as fast as they can. And I think that brings up a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety.
All right, so welcome back, everyone, to the Mindful Money Podcast. I am so excited to welcome to the podcast Cody Boyce. He's a podcast producer. He's a longtime inspiration in all the podcast groups I've been a member of, and he's really one of the guys that motivated me to get this podcast started. So thanks a lot, Cody, and welcome.
Chris, glad to be here, man. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Not a problem at all. I've actually been, I've had my eye on you since day one. No, I'm kidding. So I'll just start with a question I ask everybody here on the show. What is your philosophy on what money represents, and how has that changed as you as a person have evolved?
That's a crazy question.
Before the show, you were like, I'm not a money. You just got charged up immediately.
I'm not. I don't know if I've ever had an actual philosophy on money in terms of like, I think of it a particular way or I treat it a particular type of way. It's always just been some byproduct of work. And I never really had a deep, true meaning of it, you know?
Yes.
Go ahead. Oh. My parents never were like, money is so important because of this. And like, you should think about it in this way, and you should set up plans for the future to do this and that. It was just never that important of a topic when I was, getting through high school and getting into college. So I don't know. I never really applied that type of deep meaning to it.
So, I mean, you just said that it's like you do work and you get money. I mean, it's not about necessarily a deep meaning here, but it's really about, is that the only relationship that you see with money, or are you, I've talked to some people who are totally detached from it. Like when I say philosophy, or when we say philosophy, we're not talking about like, I wonder what the deep meaning of money is. No, it's more like, how do you treat it? Like, what's your relationship with it? That would be a better question, honestly.
And it's changed a lot more, yeah, since I've branched out on my own and started my own business and everything. It's definitely changed, but I think it's like a tool to make things happen is how I'm treating it now.
Nice.
So less of, because when you're in like a job, you work and then you get paid for that work, and that's kind of it's a lot more simple. But when you're running a business, or when you're starting a business, or when you're a freelancer, which I was for a while, it's more of a tool to make things happen. And in the line of podcast producing, which is what I do, I'm trying to find ways to add value to people for them to create something themselves too. So money comes in and gives me more opportunities to create more value for people that are creating their own content, and in turn creating more value. So it's more of a tool now as opposed to like a result of work.
Yeah, it's not the grow up, go to college, get a good job so you can retire with a bunch of money kind of scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
it's never been that for me either.
Yeah. I mean, how does that play into, that's good. Actually, that's something that I don't find in many people our age, to be honest with you.
I think we're in this weird shift. Like half of people in my generation have my kind of mindset where it's like, no, I don't want to do that solid career path and settle down and then work for 40 years and retire. So half of people I feel like are still in that boat, and the other half kind of have my view on it, and they want to be kind of free and do their own thing. And
yeah, I mean, I talk about, for me, in all my videos and in all the coaching, I emphasize the fact that my transformation happened literally when I had no money left. I ended up having the full-time job. I left the full-time job. I got another job. I got a raise in that job. I thought, oh, this would make me happy. I let myself get fired and didn't have anything going for me for, 2 years. Was almost being evicted, and I had to detach myself from the meaning of money. So it almost, for me, came with my sense of vision and success. And you say it hasn't shaped much for you, but how about, like, have you always been entrepreneurial or ambitious?
I think I was, but I didn't really realize it for a long time. Like I didn't really think about the word entrepreneurship. I didn't think about like freelancing or any of that kind of stuff when I was in high school. And even really when I was in college, but I studied music in undergrad. So just the major of music itself brought along a lot of like freelancing tendencies. I just didn't really realize what they were at the time. But now that I have a little bit more business sense, it's easy to look back and be like, oh, I easily can see where all that stuff came from now.
Yeah. So, I mean, what would you say to the people that get hung up by that? Like, I know a lot of people that have those passions and that might want to go out and help others, but, you know, they just say, hey, I can't do that because. So, like, how have you shifted to this place of, I guess you're calling it freelancing?
Well, I was for a while. When I got out of school, a lot of musicians, like, we either teach or we're out there doing gigs and teaching private lessons, as opposed to teaching in an actual school or at a college level. So freelancing, you're doing that from day one as soon as you graduate. So for a few years, that's what I was doing pretty much full time, just kind of gig to gig, trying to make things, like, put things together and piece everything together and, you know, make ends meet, as they say. And then once I got into podcasting about a year and a half ago, it's transitioned into more of an actual business itself. And I'm not as, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not as sporadic anymore, which is nice. So
it's more fluid. It's more even, like you can float.
Yeah, definitely. And it's been nice too. I mean, the freelancing thing was kind of exciting because you're always, I don't want to say living paycheck to paycheck because it wasn't like that tight, but it was always, if you're not out there doing something, you're not going to have any money to make things happen. It's not just like you can sometimes, if you're not feeling it at work, you can still go in and your body's still there and you're still on the clock and you're still getting paid. When you're freelancing, it's all up to you. You have to do everything or else nothing's going to happen. It sounds kind of obvious, but until you're actually in that situation, you might not realize it.
Well, yeah, and it puts some pressure. We put that pressure on ourselves, right? So it's almost like in order for us to earn what we need to earn, we have to create a tremendous, I'm going to say, culture, lifestyle, a set of habits that we have to live by in order to whatever. Because there's this association where when you're freelancing, and that's what a lot of people do, right? They'll go from a job or college to freelancing to a business. There is those ups and downs. There is those things that you can't predict and that can screw you over. Like that's what happened with me. I left my job and I'm like, oh, I'll just get business. No, can't do that really.
Yeah.
So you spoke earlier about how how it was you mentioned value and giving value and wanting to give value to people.
Yeah.
And this is something I think a lot of people are not aware of, is the difference. What's the difference to you between money and the value that you give?
Well, like I said earlier, I didn't really have a strong philosophy or relationship or reason behind money. So starting the business wasn't really about making money. It was when I decided to transition to podcast, it was that I saw an opportunity for me to, I didn't call it adding value at the time, but that's what it is. But it was make a difference in the podcasting community as it is. And coming from an audio background, I know you have an audio background as well.
Yeah.
I noticed a lot of stuff that was just being missed by a lot of people that were in the business. The content was good, but some audio things was like, oh, I can help just enlighten hosts on these just few simple things that they can do to make a huge difference in the show, and in exchange to adding value to the listeners that they have engaged. Let me start that over. Jesus.
Let me hit a thing so I know when that was. Right,
yeah, make a marker.
Yeah.
And in turn, just adding value to the people that are listening to that show. So it was never I need to make money in this way type of thing. It was always, I can add value here and I'm going to do that. And I did it for free for a while, or I did it, on Fiverr for, $5 a pop. So the money was never like the focus of it. It was always adding value. And then I have a show myself, and just podcasting as an industry is just something that I have a lot of interest in. And as a person that's a part of the industry, I just kind of felt like I needed to get in there and add the value that I could.
Yeah, and it wasn't until you did that you started to see what you were capable of, I imagine.
Right. Yeah, I mean, a lot of things opened up that I really wasn't anticipating. I started off just doing like small gigs here and there for for shows, like I said, for just on Fiverr for really cheap. And I didn't even anticipate like what could happen in podcasting and what has happened. And it's been a crazy ride.
So what's happened and how did that shift?
Well, it went from me just like trying to get out of the freelancer mindset, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but that's where I was for so long. So it's like, you need one gig done. I'm going to do that gig and I'm going to get paid for it. It went from just that to finding a whole concept for a podcast. So instead of just helping fix somebody's audio, it was listening to the show, trying to get an idea of what's the overall concept, what's the brand of the show, how can I produce this thing from start to finish and get an entire product out of it, as opposed to just helping with little odds and ends along the way.
And so you really focusing on the people rather than the job, adding the value, like you say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And then in terms of the type of content that we produce and the type of services that we offer, I mean, that's gone from, like I said, just some audio fixing. Let me restart that. Can't talk today.
All right, man.
It's gone from just helping people get their audio fixed up a little bit to full production of a show, and I find a lot of people that start podcasts, it's big in the entrepreneur community right now, and they don't want to spend hours and hours and hours learning how to record, how to mix, all that stuff. I mean, their goal is to free up their time, which is your number one asset. And that's what we've started helping them do. Is all they have to do is record an interview. We handle everything on the back end. So again, there's that value, just trying to do something that I enjoy and that my team enjoys, to take the workload off of other people so they can focus on what they enjoy.
It goes back to this concept of knowing what you knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know.
Yeah.
And I think that's another thing. Like, people nowadays are getting more tapped into it. They're getting more specialized, and it's almost counterintuitive. Like, how did you make that shift? You said you got out of the freelancer mindset and then shifted. How did that happen for you?
It's still kind of happening. It's gradual. It's been gradual for about a year and a half since I got into podcasting, and it's still not done. I mean, I still have a lot of freelancer tendencies that, like, we like to be in control of everything.
Yep.
And the more I've read about entrepreneurship and things that I've learned from my mentors, I have to learn to step away and relinquish control over certain things. And I've been better about it recently, but I mean, still, like I said, it's a gradual transition. It's not totally done yet.
What are some things you've learned in the process, though?
Trying to get ahead of, let me think of how I should phrase this, because I know it in my head. I just need to say it so it makes sense. Trying to be more proactive in terms of getting ahead of mistakes as opposed to fixing mistakes. So trying to, just for example, trying to set my team up in such a way that they know exactly what they should be doing, they know exactly how to do it, and they know exactly what I'm looking for at the end, as opposed to being hands off and getting something back from one of my team members and then being frustrated that it's not quite the way that I wanted it. Just one example, but trying to be more proactive and not letting stuff like that fall through the cracks. That's, like I said, being in total control of everything. That's something that I never really had to worry about because I was doing everything on my own. So it's been a tough transition, but that's been one big thing that I've learned that's really helped.
Is letting go, really.
Yeah.
So you talked about this, this needing to delegate, needing to let go, needing to lead, really. It's a transition to leadership.
Mm-hmm.
What has changed in your life since you started doing that? How has that impacted you? Because even as a person, because we talk to so many people who are already past that point or already seem past that point. And it's almost like that transition is never really highlighted.
Yeah. I think it's made me more empathetic, which has been huge. Just trying to be more aware of my interactions with people I mean, obviously, I've learned it from my team members and from working with my clients, but it translates into, relationships with my wife, my family, friends. Just I'm a lot more emotionally aware of how I say things, how I do things, expectations that I might have of people. Um, I think it's made a big impact in that for sure.
Did you have to overcome any blocks or anything to embrace that shift? I know for myself, when I was more the freelancer, I always said to myself, hey, I want to move into this, but I got stuck in my head trying to figure out if it was the best use of my time. That was one challenge that I had, but really curious to hear what kind of kicked it off for you.
I don't know if there was a specific thing. I mean, maybe like I just got married in July, so it's only
congratulations.
been a few months. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that was exactly it. Maybe subconsciously that kind of it's a new stage of life. It's time to, and that was about halfway between when I started the business and where I am now. So that might have been kind of subconsciously a big event to kind of spark all this off. But I don't off the top of my head really know if there was an exact moment.
Interesting. It seems like it just came naturally for you.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say naturally, but again, back to everything happening gradually. It wasn't an instant shift, and I've noticed that too. And I kind of expected that at certain points. Like now that I have some team members, it should be instantly. I shouldn't have to spend as much time working in the business. Things like that I thought were going to be instant, but never were. It's always been a process.
I think that plays to so many other people that are listening who much like my family, which I've shared on the show before, we would look at the end of the month and say, hey, how am I going to do anything with my life if I don't have anything extra, But even if it's just putting a little bit aside every little bit, in your case, putting a little bit of energy or putting a little bit of hiring one person instead of 5 people, it gets us to where we want to be,
And back to what I said about like thinking things that might be instant but actually aren't. I think a lot of people nowadays, especially with where we are technologically, all the information that we have, and as engaged socially as we all are, we all want things to be happening instantly or as fast as they can. And I think that brings up a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety, especially if for anyone that's listening that may be starting a business or is thinking about getting out of their job and maybe finding a new job or going out on their own, being a freelancer, being an entrepreneur, whatever it might be. Thinking that things are going to happen so quickly can be a drawback, and they can really have an effect, like emotionally, on where your mindset can be. So, go ahead.
I totally agree with that. I think that I've seen time and time again, even if people aren't trying to start a business or start a job, like they get discouraged because they're not getting what they want fast enough.
Right.
Just to echo what you said. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and those too high or unrealistic expectations can really be a bad thing. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be reaching for something. Like if you're starting a business and you have some certain goal in mind in terms of profit or in terms of clients or whatever it might be, you don't want to set too low of expectations either. But having something that's just outrageous, like I said, if you want things to happen in a particular amount of time, that might not be enough time to get things done. That might be setting yourself up for anxiety over things not happening exactly the way you want them to happen as soon as you want them to happen. And after a few of those moments where I wanted things to happen instantly, I've been a lot more laid back in terms of letting things kind of naturally occur.
Yeah, they call that SMART goals, I think. The simple, measurable, achievable. I think it's achievable or attainable, realistic, and time-bound. Getting these goals that you set to be within reach, but also a challenge.
I like that, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also important too. To celebrate successes. So is that something you do in your company culture?
Yeah, I try to, and I've tried to be down to earth and engaged with a lot of my team members. I don't want to ever act like the boss, because I know like when I did have normal 9 to 5s or whatever you want to call them, I was very resistant to the boss employee relationship, probably just because of where I was working. It wasn't the best culture. So I try to not get into that habit with my team members. And so, like you said, celebrating wins, celebrating new clients, celebrating, when we get feedback from a guest that was on one of our client shows and they were just blown away by the production work that we did. And it, in turn, they shared it with their audience, and our client show, just their stats started going up. They started getting more listeners and then more leads, whatever it might be. Whenever that stuff happens, I just try to be really open. And yeah, I just try to make sure that I'm definitely giving the team the credit they deserve and just propping them up for doing such a good job on everything that we do, and just trying to keep that relationship with all of them just as friendly and as positive as I can.
So I'm noticing a theme here. I don't even know if you notice it, but I'm noticing that, so you talked about at the beginning how money and the weight of it and things that most people subscribe to wasn't really a thing for you, which is awesome because in the research that we've done, we're saying 60% of people are expecting to be in the top 20%, and like average debt, you can come out of school with debt. So like not being held back by that is a huge gift. And you've talked about giving value. You've talked about providing to people almost in a way that you don't expect anything in return. You just give, you just create that. And then just now you were talking about your employees and really respecting. What I heard was really respecting the relationships with them. So those are also threads I see in leadership tracks. Those are also threads I see that people that talk about completely transforming their lives, completely transforming their perspectives, shifting their language, stuff like that. Everything you described is stuff that I also see with those kind of people. Tony Robbins talks about that stuff all the time. And so I'm almost seeing that the value, the money, the kind of creation of somebody handing you a dollar bill starts with the relationship. That's what I'm really hearing under what you're saying.
Well, yeah, it does. It does. And maybe it was a Gary Vaynerchuk video or something that I saw when I started this journey back in 2015. But I mean, you mentioned earlier when you introduced me that we connected first on these podcast groups on Facebook.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, from day one, I was trying to go into these groups and just help people out with any of the issues that they were having with their podcast, with their website, with their feed, whatever it might be. And that in turn just caused a lot of relationships with people that maybe they had one question and I answered it, and they weren't trying to get anything else out of me. It was just a genuine friendship, a genuine relationship between podcasters. And I would notice they might have other people that would ask them a question. They were getting hung up on something, and then my name would get recommended. My name would get thrown in. And
yeah.
it was
I think I've done that to you once or twice too.
I appreciate it, man. And it was because I was just trying to genuinely go in and just help people fix their problems with podcasting. And that's kind of how it all started. So yeah, all those relationships that I formed, all of the relationships with my clients that I formed, they all started with just trying to help them out as opposed to trying to get them to be a client.
Nice.
And I think that mindset is huge. I mean, I know there have been times where and I'll say typical business talk, like sales were down and I'm trying to increase revenue and bring in more clients. Whenever I have that mindset, it just never works out. Whenever I go out and try to get podcast clients, it doesn't happen because I believe it's because that's not the right mindset to be in. Whenever I go out and try to get on a consultation call with someone who's having issues with their equipment, then a few days later, they might become a client or they might recommend me. And that's when this stuff starts popping up. When I take the focus off of trying to bring in more money as opposed to trying to add more value, that's when the things really start happening.
Yeah. And I mean, add value or not, you're ultimately just improving the lives of other people. That's what you're doing. And you're doing that in a way that is selfless. What you just said brings me back to my days of freelancing. Every time I would try to go just get a new client, I would ultimately turn them off for whatever reason, because of the money, right? Because I was focused. My focus was on the money. But if I decided that I wanted to, what I learned, and it didn't dawn on me until you said this, is the only way that I got clients is I just went in and answered questions. And then gave people the answers that they were looking for. And if they needed additional help, I was there to say, all right, yeah, hey, I've sent you a private message or whatever. But I've gotten some of my highest value clients by literally giving everything that comes to mind away.
Yeah.
So what would you say to somebody who's not quite made that transition yet? And I know a lot of people who I encourage to be an entrepreneur or whatever that's worth nowadays. I encourage them to do that, and I say, hey, you should follow your passion and your vision, and do what you enjoy. Cody, for you, it sounds like podcasting is what you really enjoy, what you really love, which is awesome. And their response to me is often, well, I mean, I don't have. Like I don't have whatever. I don't have. I'm like, right. You should do a podcast. I don't have a mic. I don't have a this. I don't have a that. Or if it's like, hey, we can solve all these problems. All you need to do is, save for XYZ amount of time. Really, what we teach at Mindful Money it's not even a financial thing. It's like a prosperity coaching piece, right? Because what you're building isn't the bank. You're using that as the vehicle to change your practices and your beliefs. So what would be some practices and beliefs that you could give some people that are stuck in that place?
You have almost every resource that you could ever need as long as you have an internet connection. So I don't think that there's a restriction in terms of, like, if you want to start a podcast, if you literally want to start a podcast and you're so driven to do that and you believe that you have good content that people need to hear, you don't need to go out and, go into debt just to start the show. If you have a pair of headphones, that's all you need to get going. So I think if you truly believe in what you're trying to do, that you just need to start, regardless of what you have or what you don't have. You just need to start. I need to get on my own head.
Yeah, you do.
You just need to start and keep doing things consistently, keep doing things with purpose and with the same passion that you had when you decided that you wanted to start whatever it is that your project is or that your business is in the first place. Just keep doing it with that consistency and things will fall into place as you go along.
So I think a guy that we both like says this all the time, stop starting.
Yes. Yeah, that's been a real big struggle for me, is the dividing my attention between consuming content and creating content in the business. It's like you could literally spend all day, every day watching inspirational videos and interviews and reading books and never get anything done.
Yeah.
So it's a trap that anyone can fall into really quickly. But yeah, stop starting is a big one.
That's awesome. So what would you say your long-term goal is? And podcasting forever, or do you have a bigger vision you're trying to satisfy?
This is a question that I always have trouble answering because I don't
How
have
many people have asked you this question?
Goal. Everyone asked me that. I don't have like a long-term drawn out detailed vision for what's going to happen. And I think I've purposely not done that because the industry of podcasting specifically is changing so quickly, but technology and social media and the internet is changing so quickly too. I don't really know what's going to happen. I don't really know what platforms there are going to be, how podcasting is going to change, how, the live streaming thing is getting huge right now with Facebook Live and Periscope. I don't know how that is going to change and in turn transform podcasting itself. So in terms of podcasting, in terms of the podcast business, I really don't have a long-term plan like that.
That's honest.
And I don't know. I mean, it is honest. It is vulnerable. And a lot of people would say that, that's short-sighted or that's, I'm doing myself a disservice, but I'm trying to just adapt as things change.
Yeah. I mean, there's two schools of thought, right? There's a school of thought that you're going to get what you need whenever you need it, no matter what. And I also see people that are saying, hey, you can make things happen just by visualizing them. So, interesting. It's interesting to see who falls on either side. And I don't think there's a right or a wrong to it. It just kind of happens.
Yeah. And it's not to say that I don't have 6 to 12 month goals for the business itself, but in terms of like, where am I going to be in 5 years? I don't have that planned out. Not one bit.
Not one bit, he said.
Not one bit. Still with my wife and still doing podcasts. And that's pretty much it.
There you go. Making things happen, right? So I know you're not a money guy. That was the first thing you said to me.
Yeah.
But I know you see things happen in the world that is affected by money. I think you've been blessed with the gift of not having to really be burdened, or maybe you choose not to be burdened by that.
It's kind of like a double-edged sword that I don't get too involved in like the meaning of money, because it has caused like financial problems in the past. But at the same time, I don't get too caught up in that when it comes to, starting the business or running the business. But it can go both ways. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a really, really good skill to have, is not being caught up in it, because that's what holds people back,
Yeah.
And what creates some of the trouble, like what you're referring to. And it could be anything. We could pick anything about that, any of the trouble in the world. So, kind of the closing question here is, this is a big one for a lot of people too, is what kind of a world would we be living in if money as we know it never existed? How do you think things would change?
Everyone's priorities would be way different. I think there's just so much pressure on money and success and achieving, and just achieving when that's really not. I don't think that's like a worthwhile metric that you should be living your entire life by. Mm-hmm. Achieving in a particular sense, like in one isolated area, like achievement in my business. Yeah, that's fine. Achievement, like in financial achievement, that's fine. But that's not all that life is. And I think a lot of people get really, really hung up on that. And if money weren't an issue, man, if money became like non-existent right now, it would be a shock to a lot of people. I know that it would be hard to transition, but just people get so hung up on that achieving and success, and I'm trailing off because I don't know what I'm saying.
No, that's all right. I mean, people get caught up in it. You're absolutely right. I think that it's a distraction. That's my personal belief, is that money is a distraction, and so much so that we're often convinced that that's the distraction that we need to follow. It's like the carrot, we run after the carrot rather than whatever else we need to run after.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, there's like fundamental things in life, and whether it's family or friends, health, that far outweigh, the importance of money. But that's not portrayed in the way, the media that we consume or the news or whatever it is. It doesn't portray that actual truth, that money is really should not be top of our mind, but it is. And it ends up being there, far more often than not.
Yeah, it does. Awesome, man. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time with us today. I think we got into some deep stuff, and we explored a bit of the area that you haven't been, it seems like. You haven't really explored it yourself. So I'm honored for that. And I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, man.
Where can people go to learn more about you and tap into what you do in your podcast?
The podcast business is called Podcast Masters. The website is podcastmasters.net. And other than that, I'm fairly active on Facebook. I mean, Chris, I'm always on there. That's my main social media channel. So facebook.com/Cody D. Boyce. D as in David. That's my profile, and you can connect with me on there.
Nice. What's the name of your podcast?
My personal podcast is Rogue Squadron Podcast. It's a Star Wars and craft beer show. So yeah, definitely not dealing with business or entrepreneurship or money at all. It's a hobby show that we do, man. It's a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
And that's roguesquadronpodcast.com.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And be sure to tune in next week for the next episode of the Mindful Money Podcast. Have a good one, guys. You've been listening to the Mindful Money Podcast, a podcast for people who want to align their money with their values. Love this show? Head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review. Want more incredible show content? Head over to mindfulmoneypodcast.com for show notes, past episodes, and a sneak peek at what's coming next. In next week's episode of the Mindful Money Podcast.
And that was a very powerful place to go to. And, in that moment of what do I want, the only change that I could make was in my mind.